Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today in this discussion on housing affordability and racial equity. I'll begin by asking permission and forgiveness. Permission to use the terms Latino, Black, African American, and white in regards to racial groups and classes. And forgiveness if these are not the terms that you most identify with. These are the terms that are most commonly used in recent research and among experts in the field. So my goal today is to break down this big and hard to express concept into something that you can share with a friend at a barbecue. Now you may say, Michelle, wonder what kind of barbecue you go to, because I prefer to relax at a barbecue and not talk about housing and racial equity issues. Well, I am sure that things around this topic have likely come up, or it will come up at a barbecue that you attend or some kind of event. And without an understanding of the facts and solutions, you may very well miss an opportunity to combat the stereotypes and misunderstandings that are pervasive today. I'm sure you agree, knowledge is power. For instance, what do you say when a friend or relative says, "It's a shame there aren't more Black people in our neighborhood," or "I wonder why Latino people, as a majority, can't seem to get ahead"? These are not what I would call racist remarks. To me, it's something many people think about, but it leaves something out: the facts of why. And if we don't know the true why, we create our own narrative based on our own experiences, which can include a bias or a judgment and a stereotype. The facts, however, lead to solutions. So once again, my goal today is to help you understand this issue and give you the words to share the solutions. So let's start with the facts. Number one, there is a dramatic gap in wealth between people who are white and people who are Latino and Black. As you see on the slide, there is approximately $100,000 in the negative for the Latino and Black racial groups. But for the white racial group, you'll see there's over $100,000, and this is wealth. Remember, wealth is the total value of all assets minus debt. So we're going to come back to this slide, but I think it does a good job of showing that a racial wealth gap exists. Number two, there is a very large gap in homeownership rates between people who are white and people who are Latino and Black. So this shows us that 73% of people in the white racial group are homeowners. 47% of people in the Latino racial group are homeowners, and 45% of people in the Black racial group are homeowners. Now, I want to be clear, this is different than the narrative that more white people are homeowners because there are more white people in the United States. This shows us that you are less likely to become a homeowner if you are Latino or Black. This illustrates an inequality. There are not equal rates of homeownership within each racial group. However, equalizing the rates of homeownership has a huge effect on the wealth gap. So as you'll see here, in the Latino and the Black groups, their wealth jumps from, remember, a negative 100,000 to a positive around average 30,000. If all rates of homeownership were equal within each of the groups, the wealth gap would be much smaller. So homeownership has long been the primary way for families to build wealth in the United States. Owning an affordable home can offer families security, stability, and a legacy to pass on to the next generation. Eliminating racial disparities in homeownership is one of the most powerful ways to narrow the racial wealth divide. So to recap, huge gap in wealth shrinks when homeownership rates are equal. That is why homeownership is key to racial equity. So if these first two facts are obvious and unquestionable to you, then congratulations. You are one of only 50% of the U.S. population who knows that a large gap, racial gap in wealth exists. So this was surprising to me that only 50% of people knew this, but it could possibly be explained by people's desire to be colorblind as a way to treat all people equal. My personal commentary is that our nation has never been colorblind, and we should never try to see everyone as white, which is the implication of the term colorblind. And the third fact that I want to point out is that housing policies are a large part of the reason for the gap and the inequality. So this next slide makes some generalizations and uses a very broad sweeping brush, but I decided to put it in because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So as you see here, there are policies, many of the pieces of this game piece, I guess on the top level, many of those, the majority, are actual policies. Some are behaviors and some things that occurred. But policies are what we're going to talk about now. The legacy of discriminatory housing policy, limited access to affordable financial products, the shortage of affordable starter homes, and other barriers prevent too many Americans from seeing the benefits of affordable housing or even starting on the path to homeownership. So let's talk about housing policies of yesterday and today. This will show us the true why inequities exist. Why is the homeownership rate unequal? To do that, we need to take a little walk down memory lane. Caution. This is not a very enjoyable walk. However, it is necessary and very enlightening. So, as our slide mentioned, I hesitate to mention slavery, but I feel I have to start there. It was a policy. It happened legally for 246 years, and it dramatically affected housing inequality and inequities through the years. After slavery, housing discrimination was legal and common in the United States for the following 103 years until the Fair Housing Act in 1968. So let's stop for a moment and find a personal frame of reference for 1968, for that year. For me, my parents were newlyweds and my brother was about to be born. My grandparents were about my age. Until then, discrimination was legal. So in those years leading up to the Fair Housing Act, federal, state, and local housing policies were discriminatory and intentionally left African Americans behind. Here are some examples whose effects are still seen today. So state law allowed city zoning to prohibit Black people to move into white neighborhoods. It was that plain and simple. Another is when that was illegal, neighbors could independently prohibit Black people to move into white neighborhoods. And they often used the homeowner associations for that. Realtors were taught to practice racial steering. Their code of ethics stated that they were not to change the racial makeup of an existing community. Now, racial steering and discrimination in housing, that sounds really old school, right? Wrong. On Tuesday, December 1st, 2020, the Department of Justice sued Northern Alabama Housing Authority and property owners for housing discrimination on the basis of race. There's also a recent case of discrimination where a homeowner is being sued for backing out of a sales contract when they learned that the buyer was Black. Now, I don't know the outcomes of these lawsuits yet, but they are not the only examples of discrimination still occurring today. The next policy that I want to talk about is a big one. The Federal Housing Administration, known as the FHA, through Roosevelt's New Deal, gave low-interest loans primarily to white people, while giving only 2% of those loans to people who were Black during the years 1934 and 1962. Redlining was the tool that they used to discriminate. It was the practice of giving grades to residential neighborhoods that reflected their, quote, mortgage security. So loans with low grades would not be a secure loan, and therefore a high-risk loan that was denied. I'm going to go ahead and show the slide here. I'll explain it a little more. So here's an excerpt from the underwriting manual of this policy. The infiltration of inharmonious racial groups tend to lower the levels of land values and lessen the desirability of residential areas, unquote. Fact, this was not a fact. This was not proved. This was not true. They even used more clear language in their grading. One neighborhood had, quote, a fair class of Negroes and a low type of white, unquote. This neighborhood received a D rating, which was the lowest and which was indicated on the map in red, hence the term redlining. And one of the most telling examples of the impact of this policy on our communities and populations today is the overlay of the redlined areas on current cities, showing that those areas continue to be depressed, have few economic opportunities, and are heavily populated with people of color. People of color could not get out of these zones. Mortgages were not available to them. So the slide that you're looking at is an example of the rating system that I just described. So the green areas are the, quote, best areas. They got an A rating. The blue areas got a B. They're, quote, still desirable. The yellow areas have a C rating. Quote, they are definitely declining. And D, which are red, have the label of hazardous. So this is the city of St. Louis. To the right of your slide, the rounded line is the river. That's the Mississippi River. And everything to the left is St. Louis, moving on out to St. Louis County. I believe that's as far as this map goes. But you'll see that the city, more densely populated areas have the red and even the yellow. And that was where many people, Black and white, were living. And then the white people were able to get federally backed mortgages and move into more suburbs of the city, while people of color were not eligible for those. And this is a recent map. You have to kind of switch your mindset. The colors are all different, but the green is a majority Black population. St. Louis, the light green is 51%, or 79 to 51% Black. And then the light blue is a less majority of white, and the dark blue is a greater majority of white. So it's not exactly the form from the previous map, but I'm going to go ahead and flip back for a minute. Oops, I'm going to flip back for a minute and just show there are similarities to still people and families and generations not being able to move. So this is huge. So while white people were getting low interest, government-backed mortgages, Black people were being denied and forced to stay in toxic and industrial areas where jobs would also eventually leave. Some white families were building wealth in the suburbs and reaping the benefits of homeownership, while some Black people were denied that opportunity. And again, this is a broad brush, And then we're talking about different groups. There's always exceptions to the rule. And if you think that we've made a huge stride in the FHA program in more recent years, think again. Today, still, only 2% of FHA loans have gone to African Americans. Think about that. These policies led, in addition to the ghettoization of Black communities still very much seen today around the country. So though such openly discriminatory practices are illegal today, thank goodness, limitations on multifamily dwellings, affordable homes, group homes for persons with disability, and similar opportunities for underserved people, including the formerly incarcerated, continue to perpetuate exclusionary practices. Equally damaging, the legacy of these policies still contributes to a slippery slope that makes it difficult to secure a foothold in the economic mainstream. And that last paragraph was from the report done after the Ferguson study was completed. So, in review, the power of homeownership: wealth, health, education, income, quality of life, and the results of being unable to purchase a home: not having affordable housing, no stability, no ability to save money, less access to credit, less opportunities in high opportunity communities where there are good schools, jobs, good environment, parks, access to health and healthy food. So let's connect some dots and recap. We are shaped by our history. Our communities and racial division did not happen by chance. The wealth and home ownership gap is due to the legacy of federal, state, and local policies and practices. So the fun part is there are ways to bridge this gap. There are some really cool solutions. And I am actually proud of Habitat International, who has presented the solutions I'm going to present to you today. They have been doing a lot of research and work in this area, and so I am proud to present on behalf of Habitat International some solutions that are widely accepted. So I want you to listen carefully to how each of these policies and solutions are in response to the policies and practices we just discussed. Okay, so I feel like it's important that we answer the call. So there's 5 policy solutions I'm going to introduce to you today to advance racial equity in housing. There's a lot packed into each of these. I am not going to go into in-depth on any of these, but I'm going to give you a little overview to show you that there is some hope and there are some solutions. So the first is to increase opportunities for Black homeownership. And something that's really cool that Habitat International did is they set a goal of closing the Black homeownership gap within a generation. And I thought that was cool. So we can achieve this. Some ways to increase opportunities is increase access to down payment assistance. When people haven't been able to save and build wealth, they use a program called down payment assistance, and we need to increase the use and availability of that program. It exists today, we just need to increase. We need to increase access to affordable credit. So given the history of the redlining and discrimination, we need to extend mortgage and business credit to underserved, low-income, and minority homebuyers and communities. We need to invest in affordable homeownership. So even when down payment is available, unaffordable home prices remain a major obstacle to homeownership. And as you may know, I'm the director of Habitat for Humanity here in St. Charles County, and I can attest to the extreme need, increasing daily, for more affordable units in our community. We want people to be able to live and work in our community. And then another concept I'll just introduce, and you can look it up if it interests you. There's an idea about retargeting the mortgage interest deduction. Right now, the mortgage interest deduction serves homeowners and is not targeted toward people who have a specific need. And so what experts in the field are talking about is using the funding for the mortgage interest deduction, which historically costs more than all of HUD and USDA's housing programs combined, taking that and targeting it towards households who really have a need for that deduction. So number 2 is investing in distressed, racially segregated communities. So these are the formerly redline communities. So they continue to suffer from disinvestment and economic distress. And so we need to reinvest, we need to give tax incentives targeting these communities to spark recovery, but we have to be careful not to use gentrification in a way that displaces people who are currently living in those communities. The third solution is to stop perpetuating segregation. So exclusionary zoning perpetuates segregation. And an example is if I go to a city council representing Habitat for Humanity of St. Charles County, the community that I'm trying to build a home in can come out and say, we don't want your homes near us. And they usually don't say it's because there's people of different racial groups. They usually don't say it's because people have lower income. They come up with another reason, but it is one way that the discrimination still affects housing patterns today. We can reform zoning to allow mixed income communities. So by diversifying the types of homes that are allowed in the communities, we can make communities more racially and economically inclusive. And another way to stop perpetuating segregation is to increase the mobility of families with Section 8 vouchers. So you hear about Section 8 vouchers or HUD housing, but the Section 8 voucher program is really, in my opinion, a very good, intelligent, and innovative program, because what it was designed to do is to find somebody with a housing income need and then give them a voucher that they could take and use anywhere. But what is happening is only some landlords are accepting that voucher. So now you've got all the people with the vouchers in one congregated area. And the original intent of the program was to allow people to live where they wanted to live, to spread out into the community. So there are some ways to increase that program. The fourth policy solution is to invest in affordable rental housing. So I know I talk a lot about home ownership, but affordable rental housing is critical as well. There are currently only enough of those vouchers that I talked about to assist 1 in every 4 eligible households. So that is one way to make rental housing more affordable. St. Charles County has actually built a lot more rental units within the last 5 years. And on one hand, that sounds great. And on the other hand, they are very unaffordable to many of our population. So rents starting in the, 1800s and on up. And the last solution that I'll talk about today is to minimize the damage of COVID-19 on Black households. A crucial immediate step for remedying racial housing disparities is preventing eviction and foreclosure during and after the pandemic. On average, Black renters and homeowners are at a higher risk of losing their homes having entered the health and economic crisis with less access to stable and affordable homes. So that was a lot of information. If you remember only a few things, remember this. We are shaped by our history. Our communities and racial division did not happen by chance. The wealth and homeownership gap is due to the legacy of federal, state, local policies and practices, and we can make meaningful change today. So back to the barbecue. The next time someone makes a comment questioning why segregation still exists or why it's hard for some racial groups to get ahead, you can say something like this. I wondered the same thing. And then I recently learned that there's a long history that created the issues we see today. I think that things will change, but only when we learn from the past mistakes. Just like in all things, when we know better, we do better. So I'm presenting today because I believe it is the job of the generations of people alive today to recognize, understand, and address the issue of racial inequity that exists. When we have this conversation based on facts and not assumptions, we can change the trajectory of the gap and increase wealth for everyone in the future. When we all can thrive, we all are stronger. Thank you.